Let's be honest here, most big-name stars survive flops without much damage. Ryan Reynolds can joke about Green Lantern all day while Deadpool keeps making billions. Clooney can say sorry for Batman and Robin forever. But the thing is, he's fine. This video isn't about those guys. I'm not talking about the usual suspects whose careers allegedly took a hit from a bomb. This one's about the people who weren't fine. Actors who had their lives completely destroyed by box office bombs. And for some, that damage was more than just career. It actually cost them everything. Some of them ended up taking their own lives. Zabriskie Point was supposed to be legendary director Michelangelo Antonioni's big American film about the late 60s counterculture. MGM gave him $7 million. Huge money at the time, especially for a weird, surreal art movie starring two unknowns. Antonioni spent 2 years filming, went way over budget, way past schedule, and the studio absolutely hated it. When it came out, critics tore it apart. Vincent Canby straight up called it pretentious nonsense. Audiences barely showed up. It made $1 million against a $7 million budget. Total disaster. But for Mark Frechette, the 20-year-old kid Antonioni discovered literally on the street, the fallout was devastating. After the movie bombed, Mark drifted back into a radical commune, getting more and more lost. Then, in 1973, he tried robbing a bank. He said it was some kind of political statement, didn't even load his gun, but they caught him. He was sentenced to prison, and 2 years later, Mark died behind bars when a barbell crushed him. Officially, it was called an accident, but some people still wonder. What's truly messed up here is the cruel irony. Today, people rediscover the movie, partly because of Pink Floyd's soundtrack and a famous scene of a house exploding, and it's got a kind of cult following. Tarantino even calls it hypnotic, but that recognition only came decades after Mark's tragic death. By the late 80s, the Superman franchise was running on fumes. Christopher Reeve only agreed to come back if he could help shape the story. They went with a plot about Superman getting rid of nuclear weapons. Big idea, right? But the movie was made by Cannon Films, who specialized in cheap exploitation flicks. Just weeks before shooting, Cannon chopped the budget from $36 million down to just $17 million. So what audiences got was total amateur hour. Bad effects, obvious wires, recycled footage. Reeve was humiliated by the final product and never returned to the Cape. It made $15.6 million in the US, a franchise-killing bomb, and the reviews were vicious. Gene Siskel called it an embarrassment, and Roger Ebert said it looked like a parody. Even kids in test screenings laughed at the effects. Cannon went bankrupt shortly after. For Margot Kidder, who played Lois Lane, it was the final nail in the coffin. Her career had already started to slow down, but this was basically the end of her Hollywood run. After the movie tanked, Kidder fell deeper into untreated bipolar disorder and severe financial trouble. By 1996, it all blew up publicly when she disappeared and was later found in a stranger's backyard, totally disoriented. Kidder eventually talked openly about her mental illness, but her Hollywood momentum never came back. In 2018, she tragically took her own life by overdose. Of course, other factors were at play, but the failure of Superman 4 was absolutely a turning point, sending her life into a painful spiral she never fully escaped. John Milius was aiming high with Big Wednesday. He wanted to create the ultimate surf epic, the Deer Hunter of surf movies. A story about 3 friends growing up surfing through the 1960s, dealing with Vietnam, addiction, and the death of innocence. Jan Michael Vincent was his star, supported by Gary Busey and William Catt. But Warner Brothers had no clue how to market it, barely promoted it, and audiences ignored it completely. It made less than half of its budget back. Vincent was young, charismatic, and seemed destined for huge stardom on the big screen. After this bombed, that dream pretty much died. Vincent retreated to TV, stuff like Airwolf, but started spiraling into substance abuse and legal problems. Cocaine and alcoholism dominated his life, causing car wrecks, arrests, and multiple near-death experiences. Eventually, his health got so bad that he lost his leg due to infections. Vincent spent his final years in terrible shape, finally passing away in 2019. Of course, addiction's complicated. Big Wednesday didn't cause it. But this bomb ended his chance to become the star everyone thought he'd be, and it sped up a tragic downward spiral. Margot Hemingway was a model-turned-actress and granddaughter of Ernest Hemingway. Lipstick was supposed to be her breakout movie, a gritty feminist revenge thriller about a model who gets assaulted, then takes justice into her own hands. Problem was, the actual assault scenes were graphic, lengthy, and borderline fetishized. This was Paramount's attempt to make a feminist revenge thriller, and it backfired spectacularly. Critics called it exploitative and grossly inappropriate. Pauline Kael said it pretended to have a message while just being sleazy. Audiences didn't show up much either, and Paramount pulled back promotions fast after protests started. Lipstick was quickly buried and never got a proper re-release. Director Lamont Johnson later distanced himself from it, and even Margot said in interviews that she felt uncomfortable with how some scenes were handled. The movie bombed badly, and Hemingway never recovered. She got deeply involved in alcohol and drugs, spiraling downward for the next 20 years. Then, in 1996, exactly 35 years after her famous grandfather Ernest Hemingway's death, Margot took her own life by overdose. The Lone Ranger just seems like a cursed character on film. Armie Hammer got destroyed by that role later on, but way before him, Spilsbury got crushed too. He'd never even done a movie before, and he landed this big-budget Western reboot with a first-time director. And then the studio decided to sue Clayton Moore, the famous original Lone Ranger, for still showing up places dressed as the character. So yeah, there was a ton of drama before the cameras even rolled. And then Spilsbury himself had a huge ego, but didn't have the acting chops to back it up. He was so bad, producers actually had to re-record all his lines with another actor. Critics tore him apart. He even got a Razzie for Worst Actor. And after that, he was done. Afterward, he tried modeling in Europe, even some theater work, but it never stuck. By the time the next Lone Ranger film came around in 2013, journalists tried tracking him down, but he'd completely vanished. Didn't want to talk, didn't want anything to do with Hollywood. It's pretty sad actually, because this guy beat out actors like Stephen Collins, Bruce Boxleitner, even Kurt Russell had read the script. That role could have made him, but it did exactly the opposite. One of the most notorious box office bombs of the decade, Myra Breckinridge was based on Gore Vidal's novel about a film buff who has a sex change operation in order to become the kind of all-American woman no man will ever possess. Budget was $5 million, box office only made $1.6 million, and pretty much ruined Roger Herren's entire career. What Gore Vidal wrote was a satirical, controversial story. For the movie, they got Raquel Welch and Mae West, even legends like John Huston, John Carradine, Farrah Fawcett in one of her earliest roles, and Tom Selleck's very first film appearance. Should have been huge, but instead, it completely bombed. Critics called it the worst film ever, said it was tasteless and offensive. Time magazine basically said it was so bad it was like an insult to humanity. And Roger Herren, who played this naive guy named Rusty, took the worst of it. He was totally humiliated by the response, and his career never recovered. Never landed another big movie role, started drinking a lot, relationships fell apart, really sad life after Myra Breckinridge, never wanted to talk about the movie again. He died in 2014, totally forgotten by Hollywood. Two-Lane Blacktop is one of those road movies people either think is a masterpiece or absolutely hate. Back in 1971, it mostly got hate. But what's really sad is what happened behind the scenes. The story is about two racers, played by musicians James Taylor and Dennis Wilson. They're going across the country in a Chevy, racing this other guy driving a Pontiac GTO, played by Warren Oates. And then you've got Laurie Bird, she was only 18, playing the hitchhiker who tags along and kind of shakes things up. Esquire magazine called it their film of the year, printed the entire script and everything, but audiences and critics just didn't get it. They called it boring and pretentious. It barely made back its money. For Laurie Bird, who was just starting out, it was the beginning of the end. She made only 2 more movies after that. Things just never took off for Laurie. She ended up in a relationship with Art Garfunkel, but she was fighting depression, feeling lost in Hollywood. By 1979, at just 25 years old, she took her own life by overdosing on Valium. And the tragic thing doesn't stop with Laurie. By 1983, 3 out of the 4 main actors were gone. Warren Oates died suddenly of a heart attack at just 53, and Dennis Wilson drowned a year after that. Years later, critics revisited Two-Lane Blacktop, especially after director Monty Hellman passed away in 2021. Now they're calling it one of the greatest road movies ever made, maybe even better than Easy Rider. But for Laurie, that recognition came way too late. In the mid-90s, David Caruso was supposed to become a huge star. Remember how big he got from NYPD Blue? Then he left the show after a nasty fight about money, hoping to make it big in movies. Jade was supposed to be the film that did it for him. This movie was a weird mix right from the start. Directed by William Friedkin, script by Joe Esterhaas, the Basic Instinct guy. Caruso plays this assistant DA who discovers scandalous photos, important people in San Francisco sleeping with prostitutes, and then someone tries to kill him. Typical 90s thriller stuff. But the movie bombed spectacularly. Critics absolutely hated it. They called it boring, trashy, said it wasn't even good at being sexy. Rotten Tomatoes has it at like 16%, just awful reviews. Caruso later said when Jade only made $4 million on its opening, Hollywood just went silent. His exact words were, "I could have taken my telephone and my answering machine and thrown them both in the dumpster." After Jade flopped, Caruso pretty much had to crawl back to TV. He ended up stuck doing CSI Miami for a long time. And once that ended in 2012, he quit acting completely. Jade didn't just flop, it basically ended Caruso's movie career right then and there. Back in the 80s, Judge Reinhold seemed like he had a shot at becoming the next big comedy star. He was great in Beverly Hills Cop and Ruthless People. People loved him, so the studios tried giving him a movie of his own. Vice Versa, one of those body swap movies that were huge at the time, was supposed to be his ticket to stardom. Reinhold plays a dad who switches bodies with his 11-year-old son, played by Fred Savage, and audiences just did not care. The movie tanked, critics ripped it apart, and Judge later said it totally wrecked his Hollywood career. In his own words, that's exactly when the phone stopped ringing. Reinhold eventually moved to some little town in New Mexico and had to figure out how to deal with the way he'd acted on sets before. He admitted that he'd been difficult, caused trouble for a lot of people, and now he had to face it all. He even said later he was glad Vice Versa flopped, because if it had succeeded, he might never have dealt with any of his behavior. But Reinhold also claimed that Vice Versa wasn't just a random flop. He said it got sabotaged. He blamed a studio executive named David Putnam, who wanted to cut down actor salaries and change how profits worked. Judge said there was basically an executive murder plot behind the scenes at Columbia Pictures to make sure the film failed. Pretty serious accusations, but Reinhold still stands by that story today. So, Grease was massive, right? Paramount wasn't even planning a sequel. Then it blew up and suddenly they're scrambling to make one. But by that point, Travolta and Olivia Newton-John were long gone. Instead, we got Maxwell Caulfield playing Michael Carrington, the British cousin of Sandy, the Australian girl from the original movie. Caulfield thought this was his shot to become the next Travolta. He had a 3-picture deal lined up. Paramount was all in on him being their next big star. Everything looked perfect. And then Grease 2 hit theaters and nobody went. Like total disaster. Box office bomb. Critics hated it. Fans of the first film didn't show up. For Caulfield, it was brutal. He said years later it felt like being allowed past the velvet rope at some exclusive club, but then immediately getting kicked out the back door. He described it as his Hollywood career dying overnight. No calls, no offers. 2 years with pretty much nothing. Paramount dropped his deal instantly. Didn't even bother making those next 2 movies. Eventually, he found some steady work on stage and TV. But as far as becoming the next big movie star, totally done. What's kind of crazy is Michelle Pfeiffer was in this too, and she could have easily ended up the same way. But Scarface happened just 1 year later, and she became huge. Caulfield wasn't as lucky. Grease 2 might be a goofy cult classic now, but back then it killed his movie career instantly. Julia Sweeney was big on SNL in the early 90s, and her most famous character was probably Pat, this totally ambiguous person whose whole joke was that nobody could tell if Pat was male or female. Somehow, executives decided this was enough to carry an entire feature film. It went exactly as badly as you'd think. Audiences didn't care, critics absolutely hated it, and the movie only made around $100,000 total, on an $8 million budget. That's not just bad. That's like historically bad. For Sweeney, the movie pretty much ended any momentum she had. She still got small parts after, bit roles here and there, but it was almost 10 years before she finally landed as a series regular on TV again. It basically killed any big screen future she could have had, right at the peak of her SNL fame. If you remember Laurie Petty, it's probably from A League of Their Own, where she played Kit Keller. But in 1995, she got a chance at being a lead in a big-budget comic book adaptation, Tank Girl. Laurie Petty's performance was actually pretty good. She's fun, she's charismatic. Problem was, the movie itself was just weird. Badly made, badly written, strange tone shifts, production decisions that made no sense at all. Audiences stayed away completely. The movie made just $6 million on a $25 million budget, and Hollywood pretty much decided Laurie Petty wasn't bankable as a lead. It took her a long time to recover. Eventually, she came back strong, landing good roles on TV shows like Orange is the New Black, but Tank Girl killed any chance she had to break out as a major movie star at the time. Chris Klein started out strong. American Pie movies, good guy roles, likable actor. Rollerball was his big attempt at branching out into action films, a remake of a classic 70s sci-fi movie. It could have been good. John McTiernan, the guy who gave us Die Hard and a few other action classics, directed it. But the 2000s weren't kind to McTiernan. He lost his touch, and Rollerball was just more proof of that. A year later, after one more box office bomb, he retired for good. Rollerball was awful, just empty, loud, and shallow. The original movie had real social commentary, something to say. This one had none of that, just action scenes that meant nothing. It tanked, made back less than half its budget, critics ripped it apart. For Chris Klein, the fallout was rough. His momentum faded fast, big studio offers dried up. He started getting smaller roles instead. Plus, behind the scenes, he had personal struggles. 2 DUI arrests, dealing with addiction. Klein later described addiction as not really living, just existing, barely hanging on. He did eventually pull himself back, found consistent work again, mostly on TV. But Rollerball definitely marked the moment his big-time movie career pretty much died. Jamie Kennedy never quite reached huge stardom, but he was right there on the edge. He'd done Scream, had his own TV prank show, things were looking good. Then he got the lead in Son of the Mask, the sequel nobody asked for. Jim Carrey wasn't coming back, so Jamie Kennedy stepped in. Before filming, he actually met Jim Carrey at an awards show, and Carrey told him to take the role and enjoy it. Probably the worst advice he ever got. Son of the Mask was a disaster. Too much CGI, none of Carrey's charm, jokes that just didn't land. It bombed badly. $59 million made against an $84 million budget. It basically became known as one of the worst sequels ever made. Jack Black and Ryan Reynolds both turned down the part first, and Kennedy ended up taking the blame when it all fell apart. He's talked about it openly since, explained how the studio actually had a different, better cut with a lot more footage, but they demanded it be dumbed down and shortened. So the version we got was messy and embarrassing. After Son of the Mask, Hollywood just wasn't interested in Jamie Kennedy anymore.